All right. Well, welcome back to the Triple T Podcast. Today's podcast focuses on the perils and opportunities of data management. It's actually a topic we covered about 2 years ago, but honestly, the landscape has changed so fast, we thought revisiting it would be prudent. Back then, we were still talking about how to collect the data. Today, that's not a problem. The real challenge is what to do with it. The cost of the technology isn't just a subscription anymore, it's the people, the process, and the systems needed to actually make that data useful. And for a lot of fleets, the bottleneck isn't data collection, it's human bandwidth. So, how do you manage the fire hose? What actually matters? And how do you turn data into better safety outcomes? To help us break that down, I'm joined by Steve Keppler, Bert Mayo, and our old friend Fred Marsicano. 40 years in the industry and a true practitioner when it comes to making data work in the real world. Enjoy.
Thanks, everybody, for joining the podcast once again. Really excited to be joined by Fred Marsicano, friend and colleague, industry vet. This guy has been around the block a few times. Some really well-known carrier names, UPS, Triple Crown, CPG, and Quality. Super excited to have him here to talk a little bit about data management. I'm excited for this conversation because just 2 years ago, we had a similar conversation with, if you guys remember, Joshua Vance and GeoTab, and we were talking about data, but in 2 years, data has really accelerated. Data usage, sort of the need, it used to be an optional thing that maybe we'd aspire to, and now it's almost a mandatory sort of function that we need to take on. So with that, I'll just say thank you to Fred, to Bert, a little bit to Bert, mostly to Steve, and just say thanks for coming here. And maybe, Fred, you can introduce yourself to the audience and we can go on from there.
Appreciate it, Sean. I'm Fred Marsicano. I'm the Vice President of Safety and Security here at Quality Carriers. I've been with Quality Carriers about 7 years, and just started my 40th year in transportation. So done a lot of different jobs outside of pure safety, been in operations, trained drivers, just a full gamut of transportation, and currently now working with tank truck carriers or tank truck world.
Yeah, and I think, Fred, I think you've got me beat. I don't know, Bert, he's got you beat. You're old as dirt, so he probably doesn't have you beat. I don't know.
I just look better.
I like getting back to the young man role. Call me a rising star. Here we go.
Well, thanks, Fred. I think you've had all kinds of experience. We appreciate you taking some time with us today and really helping educate our audience on this challenge. I think every fleet we talk to, every conference we go to, there's lots of conversations about data and information, and so I think your insights here are going to be a huge help. Maybe help set the stage a little bit. So from your perspective, you're in Quality. What types of data streams are you using to help with the business? Well, it's ELDs, dash cams. Talk a little bit about the data that you're using internal to the business.
Sure, Steve. First off, we have data from our ELDs, as you mentioned, onboard event recorders. We have on our trucks Detroit Assurance, so we gather data from there. There's just many internal mechanisms that we have data coming in from. Some of our third parties provide very useful data for us to use and analyze. And there's just a lot of information out there that we're constantly trying to stay on top of and manage.
So, yeah, I can only imagine the fire hose that you must be sort of living with currently from a data perspective. I'm wondering, sort of, with 40 years of experience, you have gone from data on paper to the electronic data world, and you've done so through several, sophisticated carriers, like large, powerful carriers. Just wondering if you could just give before we get into the details of your data currently, just an overview of how the philosophy around data has changed in your career, in the companies that you're working for, and how that's kind of accelerated over time. Maybe that'll give us the bedrock for good conversation.
Sure, Sean. Starting my career with UPS, we were really instrumental in technology, and I remember back in I would say early 90s, UPS developed our own, I would say AOBRD in cab device to do our drivers' hours of service for them. And along with that, I think back about learning how to drive in some of our old tractors, and we had the old tachograph machines on there where you put a disc into the machine and it would track your speed, your RPMs, and then for those
that was cutting edge.
Would want to challenge and maybe not use it properly, every time you open the door, it would put a cut in the disc so if somebody was tampering with it, and from paper logs and then evolving forward and through UPS coming out with the electronic capture of data from delivery notices, and then moving into actually the ELD mandate that we were faced with in 2017. Data has really just taken off, but for my perspective, there's so much out there. You really need to have good rule sets to manage it properly and effectively. Because what I think the worst case scenario is if you are gathering data that you're not managing, you can get in trouble for not managing it. So having a good program in place to monitor and manage your all types of data.
I think that's a great point. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but so maybe stepping down next. So yeah, you're right. It's been a deluge of data. Do you see it? Is it more pronounced on the kind of in the back office environment, or is it more pronounced on the vehicle, or is the answer just yes?
Yes, and it's controls that we put in place because I'll give you an example. A driver could have alerts set in their truck for all types of events that go on, and to try to be cognizant of what they're doing and paying attention to the road and trying to drive safely, it could be overwhelming to the drivers with all the different types of alerts out there. So we need to be able to naturally. Some alerts are imperative that our drivers need to be aware of, such as if they're drifting off lane departure, that kind of stuff, or following too closely. But being able to determine what's practical and give that driver comfort and knowing that things are being monitored, but he or she still needs to focus on driving and keeping the vehicle safe. And it's also from the back office, and then we have several different types of employees that manage particular parts of the data on a day-to-day basis. So having controls in place for that kind of stuff, Steve, is important, because you don't want someone to have full access of all the data. It should be specific to, again, what I said earlier about being able to manage what they are.
Yeah, and I think that's so how do you're right. So how do you go about making those determinations? Like what's important versus what's noise? Like how do you go about making those judgment calls?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to the different peripherals that are being used to capture that data. So take, for instance, the ELDs, the OBERs are too big. Capturing the data through those devices, who needs to be able to monitor and go through that data and those are the things that you have to assign. For example, the OBAR, who's going to review coaching opportunities with drivers, and then you delegate that type of work um, to those people, and naturally back office, the hours of service with the ELDs, they have a big part of that as well.
Fred, do y'all? I mean, I have an opinion, and I see it done lots of ways. But what do you think is best managed on stuff like day-to-day activity, like that type of activity, or camera events for a driver? Do y'all keep that in-house? When I say in-house, I mean safety and risk, or do you push that to operations because they have the interaction with the driver?
So the way it's structured here, we have driver managers, and we have a group of folks that also deal with our independent contractors on the operational side of things. Our my safety team is engaged in all those events, and they get involved when typically when it goes beyond the coaching components. But we want to see the drivers to be able to be aware of what events are being triggered, and being able to correct those events on their own. And then when we're having a lot of different types of events, then we'll interject with some coaching tips to try to get them to be safer. And I'm specifically talking on the OBER side.
So it's interesting that we talk, and I think a lot of carriers are constantly asking us, like, how do we right size our safety program? How many people do we need? And this data landscape, this technology explosion, I feel like has really potentially changed the calculus here. Another way to look at it is to say, when we used to look at technology, what the cost that we considered was the cost of the subscription. But now it's the cost of the subscription, the cost of managing data, the time it takes our staff to manage that data, integrating that data with the rest of our systems. So how much of that do you think motor carriers have had to apply additional resources in order to properly onboard or manage that data versus what used to be sort of human to human relationships?
That's really, you hit a lot of things there, Sean. And first off, with capturing the data and then managing it takes resources. So just alone managing day-to-day hours of service and making sure the systems are up and running properly, and drivers aren't having problems with their ELDs. We need a good, strong support group in the back office. But I think what I'm seeing right now is the technology is shifting, and I'll give you an example. We've been with our current provider for OBER for 5 years now, and technology has evolved over those 5 years, and now we see a lot of camera manufacturers using AI assistance, and then driving that to back to the driver so that they can self-coach themselves and take care of these issues, and incentivize them to say, you get a score for doing good things. If you're not doing something that you could, or you're doing something you could improve upon, start working on it to get yourself better. And that to me is going to help manage the data, put it back to the driver who's driving the vehicle, and take ownership before anybody else has to interject and get involved in it from a coaching perspective.
And I think that brings up an interesting point, because I think back to Sean, one of the comments Sean made is, we used to just think, okay, the cost of the tech or whatever you're installing, and then think of everything else after the fact. I think what you're alluding to, which we see some carriers have, but many don't, is a data management plan. By that I mean, everything isn't house on fire, right? And so that's, I think of email as an example, right? There's some people that have to respond right away to every email, right? And so we were never really taught, email, growing up, how to manage your email, right? I mean, it's not something that, and so I see that kind of that evolution with carriers. Now we've got all this data, having a plan for, okay, what's a different tiers, right? What's something we have to deal with right now? What can wait? What's trend data? What are we using for coaching? How are we using it across the whole? So what are your thoughts there about having like a plan and a tiering, if you will, of what data you're using and for what purposes?
Yeah, it all starts with that, Steve. So you could capture so much useful information, um, and it's overwhelming. Just an example. I'll stay on the OBR. Um, we have you may be able to have triggered events or alerts for 40 to 50 different types of behaviors. And if you try to manage 40 to 50 different types of behaviors, you just don't have the resources to do it. So to build your data management, you really need to look at the high impact alerts and start with something small. And then you could, once you get master it, then you could evolve into taking on more and more, and set the rules that things that things that will trigger um, imminent danger, or signs of drivers needing immediate um, coaching. Those are the things you need to focus on, because if you turn them all on, you're not going to be effective, and you can only be as effective managing the data as what you have in front of you that you can control.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing happen is that the volume of the data, it used to, it's like surpassed our like human processing threshold. We can't possibly accept all of the data, process it, and make decisions. You talked about sort of AI in the camera and sort of automatically delivering that information to drivers to help coach them. Is that kind of where you see the future of this, like deploying AI tools to better manage that data? And if that's the case, like, I think there's still a bit of an AI trust gap out there, right? I think there's still a little bit of skepticism. I use it in my daily life, and notice plenty of things. It's constantly apologizing to me. Oh, I'm sorry that I got that wrong. So just wondering, how, if that's is that the direction we're going, where we're just going to have to allow AI to help us make some of these critical safety decisions, A, and then B, how do we get past that trust gap?
Yeah. So when it comes to AI, for me, I rely on the vendors that are providing the information. Okay, and looking at it, it'll never take out the human component of making decisions, but it could take the data and make it more usable, or make it more practical on how you apply those decisions. So that's where I find it very useful. And again, we're just getting into some of this stuff right now with at quality carriers, but uh, I think it's just going to be a tool to help us manage the data more effectively and efficiently.
So, Fred, at the end of this, right after all the events, and you shake out whatever scorecard you have or event threshold you have, you're telling me, I guess what I'm hearing is there's always going to be a need for a human being on some one-on-one coaching for that driver. Yeah.
Sure, eventually there's got to be some intervention, but the more we could put back to the people doing the jobs, identify areas for improvement, and they are accept the constructive advice to get better. I'm speaking specifically on driving behaviors right now. That's really important. I speak to our new training classes every week, and one of the messages I say is, I ask for a show of hands for the drivers in the classroom, How many of you been driving for over 5 years and uh, get a nice show of hands, and then I ask, well, out of that group, how many of you had somebody ride along with you since you've gotten your CDL to do a safety ride, or to just go through and make sure you're operating the equipment? And very, very few people have that luxury. And then I tie it into the coaching that we're going to be providing, because we all develop bad habits, no matter if you're driving your personal vehicle or you're driving a commercial motor vehicle. You become complacent in some areas, and there's always opportunities for us to get better at what we do. And so with that example, I tie it into saying, when you receive coaching, take it as a positive, learn from it. If you're not using your turn signals, or you may be following too closely, these things can help prevent you from getting into a serious accident. And keep being open-minded. It's not a critique on your experience, or it's just to try to help improve safety. And I think truly everybody wants to be safe out there on the roads, and it helps them understand the process. And that's the way of utilizing the data to
You're like, hey, who's had a safety check ride? And some people raise their hand, and then you're like, hey, now you've got 100% of the time safety check ride. I'm guessing the safety check ride wasn't the favorite part of the driver's job, So there's a balance. There has to be a balance, and I love the frame of like, hey, take this as a positive. Like we're all trying to get better. But the thing that some of this data has done is, like, there didn't used to be somebody that could always notify Fred that their driver didn't activate their turn signal soon enough, and so I don't know. You could certainly see both sides of that coin. Go ahead.
I guess the other thing I'd like to ask Fred is, there's kind of a cultural issue, maybe, right? Drivers, do they trust the data, right? I mean, I can see the old school drivers are like, that machine doesn't know anything. I've been driving a truck for 30 years. I've never had an accident. How do you overcome that? Because we know that the there's truth in the data, right? Just because he hasn't had the accident doesn't mean he's not going to. So what's some tips about overcoming that with some of our older, seasoned, gray-haired drivers, like me, by the way?
So I've driven with you, Bert. I'm going to leave you out of this.
No, please. Yeah. Nope, that's not how this podcast works.
That's right. We'll roll that
way. So, when you think about it, though, those drivers of 30 years with no accidents, they're not popping up on the radar for several reasons, because they have those good habits. I have a driver out of West Virginia, David Parker, and he's been driving probably 40 years now. He'll tell you he takes it slow. They call him right lane for a reason. That's a CB handle, because that's where he stays all the time. So he's developed those good safety habits over the years. But we don't see that tenure in our industry as we used to, Bert. We're seeing drivers with less than 5 years experience, and a lot of times drivers jump jobs so frequently, so you don't get to build that history. But again, even us long-term drivers, that with the experience that we have, we still have opportunities to improve. And
shout out Dave Parker, come on our podcast. We'd love to talk to you.
That's right.
We've tried. We're going to get him one day. I talked to Dave for quite a while, Fred. You had me talk to him.
That's right. I remember that.
We'll get him.
You'll need 2 hours for the conversation, because he's just such an interesting person, and he has so many great stories that could benefit people. It's really impressive.
Well, and that's we like the practical side of things. We really try and share that as much as we can on the pod. So I think one thing I did want to mention real quick. We've been talking a lot about kind of internal data. I know you're a big proponent of of collaboration, right? So do you use, any third party like external data sources to help you with your safety programs? I know you do a lot of peer exchange with peer fleets. Like talk a little bit of, or maybe research, like, because you have to normalize kind of baseline benchmark, what you're doing against kind of, so maybe can you talk about that a little bit? Because sometimes people can get so focused internally, they lose the bigger picture.
Or they can't see the bigger picture. They want to, but they don't have the relationships or the opportunities. A great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so valuable to have conversations with our peers in our industry, and we do that quite regularly. There's a small group of us in the tank truck world. They get to they get together monthly for calls, as well as um, we get together twice a year to discuss best practices. What are we seeing out there? That you're having problems with, because we're probably having the same issues here, and we're able to talk about that. And data has come up at every meeting. We also you have the state associations, the ATA and TTC, safety, security, maintenance councils. They're great venues too, because um, typically somebody has a better way of doing things, or at least gives you opportunities to think about different ways to manage. We don't use a third party to gather all of our data and um, you know spin it around and churn out predictive indexes, but we do have third parties providing some really good information and data. Fortunately, we have a pretty robust internal system that we're able to pull stuff together and work towards, the ultimate goal is a predictive index at high risk events or drivers that we can focus on. And that's how we manage it here. But the collaboration, Steve, is just invaluable. It's really helps us in the
Fred,
industry.
are there any silos today that you would see? I mean, not just your experience here, but in the past, or shared experiences with some of your peers, that we got pockets right within our companies that just we're not communicating well together. That you're not able to make a complete decision.
Yeah, external silos in the safety world, I don't see that. Everyone is, we just want people to be safe, and we're always trying to help each other. Internal business silos, yeah, they exist, but I'm going to say when we have an issue, we have all different departments. We have analysts that are able to pull data for us internally, and we collaborate internally, cross functionally to solve problems. And again, it may be something different in a let's just say in a different environment, maybe in an operational situation, but when it comes to safety, I don't see those silos that we probably grew up with when we first
So, I
started.
mean, then that,
In
I
the
guess the
industry.
takeaway is, in order to truly manage what you have, maintenance, ops, finance, risk, everybody's at the table looking at the same scorecard dashboard every month. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, yes, or we provide that
Okay.
dashboard to the other parties. Sure, but everyone knows what's going on.
The question is, how do they action it? And that's a totally different conversation.
Yes.
Before I lose my string, though, we've worked with a few fleets, and most fleets have some sort of corporate structure and then some sort of field operations, right? And it's often those folks in the field that are charged with onboarding drivers or whatever the case may be. Every time there's a change in our environment, we need to also make a change probably to the background data, right? I have a new piece of equipment. I need a new VIN number. I need a new vehicle number. I've got a new driver. I need a new name. When people leave, I've got to expunge people from my data. How do you how do you get everybody? We were just with a fleet, and they were like, yeah, we have this great technology and this great, sort of new platform to manage our vehicle maintenance. But the challenge they were having was getting that basic data and keeping it clean, right? Because their field wasn't uploading that data when they could, or you know what I'm saying? So like, how do you encourage that, or what sort of accountability measures do you have in place to keep that data clean? Because you could have the best data dashboards in the world, but if Johnny, who's got the best score, hasn't driven in 6 months, that doesn't help you. If your best truck has been parked against the fence for 4 months, that doesn't help you, right? So do you have any just strategies on how that should be done? And that question was definitely not in the list of questions before. So,
well, no, I want to reiterate on that, Fred. If y'all do a great job, any advice is warranted, because I can tell you some very large carriers who we help them track their cameras, and at any given day, there's several hundred cameras and they don't even know where they're at. So that leads to bad data, to your point, Sean. So bad data can be worse than just data, right? I mean, we don't know what we.
Yes, and it wasn't in the script, Sean, but I could handle
I knew you could. I knew you could.
But you're exactly right. That's the biggest issue that we have, not only in our industry. It's probably everywhere. So the first thing you said, like how somebody leaves, somebody comes on board. We have a pretty strong system here of when somebody starts, they get access to whatever their role description is, so that they can manage that data or whatever those tasks are. When they leave the company, we're able to turn that off. But keeping the records up to date and keeping them current, if it's a manual process, you're always going to be at risk of having errors. And we find these errors when you say like the VIN and however they input their tractor or trailer information and their plate registration and that stuff. So you do have those challenges. The thing is to be able to have checks and balances, auditing them, having other departments review the work that's being done. Those are some of the safeguards to keep the integrity of the data in place. And and one of the things I know we're going to probably talk about it is retention of data. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the biggest hurdle, because not only do you have internal retention, but then you also have the third parties who's providing the service to you. You need to be aware of what their retention policy is, and you got to make sure that it matches what you want. And then another part of it is too, make sure they don't share this data with anybody, because if you don't read the fine print, and not to say they're being deceitful when they're presenting stuff to us, you just have to be aware of all the data and who has access to it and what controls you have in place, especially on when you go to purge that data. That's really important.
I think, Sean, you brought up a really good point for this conversation and this topic, because I think a lot of people don't understand how important that foundational data is, particularly once you start layering in automation and AI, because now you're automating bad data or making poor decisions, right? And that can compound itself. And so I think, it takes a lot of time and effort to make sure that data is clean, but it's not something that you can sacrifice.
It's just bonkers. Like, how many times, Steve, we said, hey, show us your last periodic inspection? Well, I know it happened, but it wasn't entered, or I can't find it, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times, good-natured people, it did happen. It did happen. But Fred don't know it. because it didn't get entered into the system, right? And so he can't tell the actual health of his fleet. Sorry to interrupt you, Bert.
Well, no, I just this becomes this giant ball of wax, right? But I do want to unravel part of it and throw a question to y'all too. Is seeing the consulting world is it's one of the ones I get frequently. And Fred, feel free to answer, but if you don't want to, I understand, because a lot of my clients aren't there yet. What do you do with camera data at the scene of the accident? Do you tell the plaintiff or the officer to go get an attorney? Do you meet him at your office, or do you share it with him openly? I mean, that right today is all over the board. I've got the camera data. I can prove my innocence, or maybe I don't prove my innocence. So what do I do with that by policy? Is there a standard out there?
I don't know if there's a standard. Internally, I could tell you we have a process in place when we download the videos. And if law enforcement is requesting the videos, we have a process to go through for authority to release those videos, whether they're in favor of, if our drivers were at fault or not at fault. We're always cooperative with law enforcement as much as we can be in the situations that present itself. But we do have an internal group that reviews the videos and goes through the request in detail, what they're looking for, and then ultimately the main decision makers make that decision on releasing the data to law enforcement. So, and outside of that, Bert, I want to just hit something, Sean, you brought up about the periodic inspections. So the safeguards we have here, we not only do an annual inspection, but we do 3 and 4 quarter. We usually do 3 additional inspections, or we do a total of 5 inspections on all of our equipment. That is tied into our dispatch system. So if we will show an expiration date on that equipment when the current periodic inspection expires, and they can't dispatch that piece of equipment sometimes up to 3 days before it expires, because of it. We don't want it expiring if somebody's taking it on the road.
That's
but
the
to
gold
that
standard.
Point,
not a lot of people can get there.
That forces our people. Yeah, right. And that forces our people that did the inspection to get it in the system. Or if it's not done, we need to get it done.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we consistently advise, if you can get it done. But most people are still working on disparate systems. They're just realizing they need to get all this data, so they get this vehicle maintenance system that has nothing to do with how they dispatch trucks. So I love that. I do think it's 100% the gold standard. I want to get back to this Bert question on the cameras. I think that's what we hear, right, Steve? Mostly from the lawyers, like, hey, not right away. What is the conversation between the driver and the officer look like in that moment, right? Because let's be honest, the driver probably didn't do it. I mean, we know what the data says, and they are probably eager to get some beneficial information on the police report. So how do you school your driver in having that conversation in that moment?
Yeah, that's really important, and we always let the driver know that the people they have to talk to, they have to notify us if they're involved in an accident, a crash, and they have to talk to the police. So they can speak to them. They also know that if they're requested more information and their registration, their license, that we have to provide it, then they contact us, and we have a very open communication on every event that we have, and we coach the drivers through those steps.
Yeah, and
what is your What is your retention, Fred, or does it vary based off of event or based off of what you're collecting? Like I'm sure ELD is 6 months. Are you doing the same with your camera?
Yeah, so um, the ELD, we follow FMCSA retention guidelines on that. Um, we have it set up with our OBR provider on all events that we have, triggered events, that there's a time frame that they'll purge the data for us. And then when we are engaged in accidents with other parties, that goes on an internal retention, because everything may seem fine at the time, but two maybe 4 years later, we find out someone's filed a lawsuit with us. So that time frame's a lot different for internal
Yeah, and
retention
you need
for
it to
us.
exonerate yourself, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you need it more than they need it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but the big thing is we have we not only do we have for the communication and releasing of videos, but a process to do that. But when we're involved in an accident, we have a process that naturally we're collecting pertinent information and preserving that immediately. So we just stay ahead of it in case we ever have to produce that information. And I've been talking primarily from a safety perspective, but Sean, when you bring up the maintenance telematics, and just we have alerts inside. We get inside the cab for maintenance issues. We also get in the back office alerts when service is required. There's so much there that helps our maintenance team um, manage that truck, so it is roadworthy and safe, and get the best life out of that vehicle as we can by following the telematics from what's being provided to us on the back office side. So there's so many different components, and I'm kind of biased because my life is in the safety world. But even with fuel economy and idle time, and trying to become more efficient at those things, there's so much out there that helps us.
But Fred, I don't know your biased. I mean, I'm sure we've seen savings in maintenance. I don't know it's been exponential though, and with safety and risk, especially with the camera. I mean, the exoneration piece it's double digits in the ROI I've seen with my clients. It's a no brainer, right? I mean, it's rare that I come across a motor carrier, and I do occasionally, but it's very rare I come across a motor carrier over 100 trucks that doesn't have at least a forward facing camera.
Well, I think
Everybody.
one of the challenges on the maintenance side is, and we see it all a lot, particularly with fleets that have multiple vendors, multiple shops, just the lack of data and integration. So there's blind spots that they don't even know they have or don't have, and so they're exposing themselves to challenges, and it's tough for them to get their arms around it because a lot of them are using third parties, and so it's a challenge with all the maintenance records to keep things straight and make sure you're doing things when you should be doing them, and you can Fred, you're pretty far advanced, I would say, than almost all the fleets that we've dealt with on this, and they may not directly be contributing to crashes because the driver's driving the truck, but sure as heck, if there's a crash, the plaintiff's attorney is going to expose those gaps for sure, right?
Correct.
What advice would you give a small motor carrier, Fred, that's never done anything other than maybe ELDs because they had to? Where would they start? What would the one thing you would tell them to start with, and how to start with it?
I think the cameras add a lot of value to safety. If they're not in position to equip their vehicles with cameras, use the telematics from what's coming across from the engine, from the ELDs. They're lots of alerts that they can manage effectively that will help prevent accidents, hard brake applications, lane departure. Those components are significant in
I
day-to-day
love that.
driving.
I mean,
But
you already
whatever
have. I
they do,
love that.
Bert,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever they do, I always say start small. Don't take on if your ELD provider can give you 40 different types of behaviors, excuse me, or um, events that could be triggered. Take a small group and get good at what you're looking at, and stuff that has the most impact on
And
safety.
I think that's really good advice, Fred. We deal with so many fleets that don't leverage their providers to the extent that they should. Right? There's capabilities that these providers can make available that they don't even know about. So leverage your providers to help them develop the reports and the data that you want to see, and leverage them, because they're there to provide that service for you. Don't just set it and forget it.
Um, but every vendor box comes with 50 shiny toys in it. So, choosing which ones are certainly important. Here's the obligatory question, just that we have to ask on every podcast of every motor carrier, and it's about Johnny and ambulance chaser down the road who's coming after us for everything. Does this? It's kind of a few schools of thought, like, hey, let's be cautious in the things that we adopt because it creates more exposure, versus like, let's try to do everything to demonstrate that we're not your average carrier. Does the danger of litigation, given the amount of data that you guys are trying to process, given the potential gaps that we've talked about, does that keep you up at night?
No, and here's why. Um, and it really did, but you cannot allow things like litigation with a negative effect on safety. So what I want to make clear is you could be looking at all these different areas, but you don't have to. Look at a controlled amount of data that could help prevent you, because no one can say that if there's 100 different pieces of information that I get, that I have to manage that information. I choose what's effective to manage safety, and I can't be I just can't be a subject to the litigation and saying, well, you didn't download this piece of information and you should be monitoring this or that. You control your own safety. You do need to have um, policies in place on what, like I said earlier when we started, identify what you're going to manage, but you need to manage it. So if you're managing following distance, and no one's if you're receiving following distance data and no one is taking action on that, that's what gets you in trouble. But if you're taking action and addressing those following distant issues, that's what we commit
Well, and I
to.
think that's really sound advice, right? We talked about it a little bit earlier, the data management plan. You have justification as to why you are measuring these things, and these things are critical to safety, and you've made that determination based upon what the data shows. And as long as I think that's great advice.
Yeah,
Well,
better data. You want better data, not more, right? I just want to better do what I do.
yeah, don't do what Bert does. Do what Fred does.
Not what I
Sure.
do.
Well,
I think
I want to be mindful.
no, sorry, I was just going to say it's the right data. right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Well, actually, and I'm Sean. I'm sure you have 15 closing questions, but I'm gonna give Fred the
I
one.
got at least 2 jokes, most of them about you, both. So leave me time.
Fred, you're God today, right? You're starting a brand new 10,000 power unit motor carrier. You are CEO God. What is the one KPI you want on your desk every day?
Oh,
The
that's my
one.
question, Bert.
Oh,
But I want 2, and you cannot use crashes. You cannot use crashes. I love that question.
Well, if I'm going to be that CEO, it's not going to be. It would be one of my top 5. Naturally, is um, how we're doing financially as a business. But my number one would be safety related, and it would. It's hard to say one KPI with all the different areas of safety that between uh, EHS, people getting injured, road safety. I would just say I would like a dashboard to show to mirror what your core values are as a company, and safety is
That's why
definitely.
you're the next
But
CEO of
before,
the largest motor carrier on the planet, right there. Core value. I mean, that's it, right? Align your core values with what you're measuring.
yeah.
you have to, walk the walk, talk the talk. You have to, if you put it out there, this is what our core values are. Support it. But I've been dying to tell you of a great example of data, and no one's
Can
asked
you
me
give
for
me
it.
a great example of data?
Go
That
ahead,
was going to be
Steve.
my
Ask that
question. So Fred, give us a great example of how you've used data to better your operation.
That's a really good question, Steve. Thank you. In 2024, we had proportionally a large amount of rollover events for 2024, and our initiative was naturally we want to get to 0 accidents, 0 rollovers. Um, so, what can we do with this data? And every time someone has a rollover, we go deep. How long has the driver been driving tank trailers? Um, how long has the driver been driving? Was weather involved? We go through the driver's history. We go through all the aspects of the rollover, and you would think you could find one common denominator among those crashes that we got to target this group of drivers who've been here 6 months to a year and a half. It wasn't. It was just all over the place. So what we started to do then is pull in some of the key contributors in our world, in hauling tank trailers, lane departures, and naturally if you're drifting or you go off onto a soft shoulder, you have the propensity to roll over. So we started really notching up our analytics on lane departures, and what really got us going was the roll stability, that we can monitor roll stability from three different sources. So now we're looking at roll stability reports to identify drivers that are having these types of events, because like most of the tractors will, between applying brakes and adjusting, if they're starting to see a shift of weight, it'll try to counter adjust so it keeps the unit level, those types of things. So we're analyzing those reports, and then another provider has statistical data that shows specific points on highways that have high rollover events. So now every day we're pulling this data in, and now we're identifying a group of drivers that we need to talk to, and we put a lot of communication out, both through LMS, through blips on their ELD, to driver meetings, just conference calls with drivers to really heighten the awareness. But by pulling all this together and then identifying drivers who may have a higher risk, either by where they're driving, what type of equipment they're driving, or how they're adjusting speed and in turns, those types of things, we were able to reduce our rollover events 47% year over year by just analyzing that. And I'm extremely proud of our drivers and our teams for getting that message out. You can't control them all, but when we're looking at it, the predictive index was definitely something we were able to utilize and help reduce that big number. And those are catastrophic.
Oh, yeah.
As you all know.
Clearly, I think, in your business, you've got, I think that's really smart, right? You look at roadway curvature, elevation of curves, curve radii, how much of load you have on, because the liquid slosh has a definite impact on stability. All those things are really critical to rollovers for sure. That's fantastic.
So I'm really proud of that for last year. And Steve, I appreciate you asking the question.
Yeah,
I appreciate you asking me to ask the question.
Yeah.
Fred, is there any other questions you want us to ask?
Oh man, I'm just really sorry we don't have another hour, but want to say, Fred, thank you for your wisdom and for your time, for making this possible. We'll do it again in 2 years when we talk about the fire hose of data, and as it continues to explode, like how do we leverage AI or BERT to make it better? So with that,
by the way, before we go, really just some anecdote. What do we all think is going to happen? I mean, we're at a speed of. I just went to a Geotab conference. I went to I can't think of the other conference, but dude, it's changing every day. I mean, what's it going to look like in 2 years?
Boy, howdy. That's a whole nother podcast. I mean, I think that I have no idea. I think that I'm on the ride, on the roller coaster, just like you are.
And the component we don't even really talk about are the autonomous vehicles out there, and what's coming from that data. It's definitely, like you said, a fire hose. I'm excited though with the advances of technology in helping our drivers become more successful by their own efforts. And I really like that whole self-coaching, giving them the opportunities to improve. And I'm going to be excited to talk about it with some statistics and once we get rolling with this new technology.
I think you're right. I think you're seeing more and more. I think there's been huge advancements in sensor hardening the last couple of years. Sensors used to be not as accurate, but there are a lot of advancements there. I think Bert, and I think the success of cameras, you're starting to see now 360 view cameras being deployed all across the vehicle. So I think more instrumentation on the vehicles, particularly on trailers, I think, because that's still a blind spot in many respects. So I think you're going to see more instrumentation, which is going to give I think, Fred, to your point, it'll give more data to the back office. You'll still have to parse out more, but it's going to allow you to provide more alerts back to your drivers on what's happening on the vehicle so they can make better decisions, right?
Totally agree.
There you go. Now we know. And that's half the battle. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Appreciate the conversation. Appreciate the discussion. Have a great whatever day of the week it is for you that's listening.
Enjoy your weekend, guys.
Yes. Thanks, Fred. Thanks for listening to this episode of True North Truck Thought. If you enjoyed the topic today and want to tune in for future conversations here on the Triple T Pod, make sure to follow us. Also, please don't hesitate to let us know which topics you want us to cover in future episodes. Drop us a line in the comments section or send us an email to transportationnews@TrueNorthCompanies.com. Thanks and have a safe day.